This year's White House Correspondents Dinner had a few moments of media reflection. President Biden came to the podium with no shortage of scripted zingers, but he had this to say about democracy and entertainment. Here's a little of what he said.
The First Amendment grants a free press extraordinary protection, but with it comes, as many of you know, a very heavy obligation to seek the truth as best you can, not to inflame or entertain, but to illuminate and educate. I know it's tough, and I'm not being solicitous. The industry is changing significantly. There's incredible pressure on you all to deliver heat instead of shed light because the technology is changing so much. The system is changing. But it matters. No kidding, it matters. The truth matters. American democracy is not a reality show. It's not a reality show.
And comedian Trevor Noah had this to add.
Every single one of you, whether you like it or not, is a bastion of democracy. And if you ever begin to doubt your responsibilities, if you ever begin to doubt how meaningful it is, look no further than what's happening in Ukraine. Look at what's happening there. Journalists are risking and even losing their lives to show the world what's really happening. You realize how amazing it is. Like, in America, you have the right to seek the truth and speak the truth, even if it makes people in power uncomfortable, even if it makes your viewers or your readers uncomfortable. You understand how amazing that is? I stood here tonight and I made fun of the President of the United States, and I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be fine, right? Do you really understand what a blessing it is? Maybe it's happened for so long that it might slip your mind. It's a blessing. In fact, here, ask yourself this question. Honestly, ask yourself this question. If Russian journalists who are losing their livelihoods, as you were talking about, Steve, and their freedom for daring to report on what their own government is doing, if they had the freedom to write any words, to show any stories, or to ask any questions, if they had basically what you have, would they be using it in the same way that you do? Ask yourself that question every day, because you have one of the most important roles in the world. Thank you so much for having me.
Joining us now to discuss the media's role in conflating democracy and entertainment is Deputy Editor at Newsweek, Batya Ungar-Sargon. Batya, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you've written in your most recent book about all of the perverse incentives that have changed over the course of kind of contemporary media, where newspapers used to be funded by, individual low-income people spending a cent or so to buy the rag and find out what's going on in their communities, and how the shift to an advertising model changed those incentives to gear the news toward affluent folks. I'm not hearing that criticism come out here. I mean, what do you make of the nature of the criticism we're hearing now from both Joe Biden and Trevor Noah?
Joe Biden is, I believe, the president of the United States who has been most defended and most protected by, the vast majority of legacy media, right? We saw this with the Hunter Biden laptop story. We see this every single day. Their refusal to ask him hard questions, the way that the media today is protecting the most powerful person on the planet. So to have him get up there and start lecturing the media about, being, too sensationalist when all they do all day is protect him, I found that to be so ironic and so hilarious. Like the need to move the scene of the problem, right? Exactly like you said. And I think with Trevor Noah, it's a similar critique. Like the problem with the media right now is it's catering to very wealthy elites on both sides. And in so doing, it is not the thing that's destroying the media is not a threat from the government. It's literally the threat of peer pressure of rich people, right? That they're no longer going to like you. That is the problem with today's media ecosystem. The tagline should be democracy dies under peer pressure, right? It's not, there's nobody standing there with like a gun who's going to shoot you like in Russia, or they're going to like bomb you out of your apartment impeachment or throw you out a window if you report something unfavorable about Joe Biden. But here's the problem with today's media. They don't need to, right? That's the problem, is Joe Biden doesn't need to throw you out a window because the media, due to just purely peer pressure reasons, legacy media on the left will never say anything truly dangerous or threatening to him.
Yeah, and you can see that the manufacturing of consent is not necessarily, like you say, forced. You saw Van Jones made some kind of mildly critical observations about why Joe Biden's poll numbers are down and trended over the weekend because people were so upset just that he observed what the left has been saying, what has been obvious for a really long time. Well, journalist Glenn Greenwald pointed out on Twitter that Trevor Noah is a threat to Biden or anyone else. Is one of the few funny things he's ever said. The notion that he's a threat is one of the few funny things that he's ever said. Asked Julian Assange what happens to journalists who are actually adversarial to the U.S. security state and reveals official crimes. The president Noah is praising has him in prison. Fair critique, Batya?
It's a totally fair critique. I mean, it's just so fair. When people sort of start talking about cancel culture as comparable to, authoritarianism or the Chinese Communist revolution, I look at that and I say, no, that's not fair because there's no state power behind it, right? It's really just peer pressure, right? But at the same time, it's so awful. Trevor Noah saying, you have this freedom, right? It's true. They have so much freedom. And if you look at what they do with that freedom, they use it to bully other journalists, to smear other journalists, to expose, Twitter accounts that they don't like. The legacy media used to use its immense power and its immense resources to expose corruption in the government. And today they use it to protect the government and to defend the government and protect the administration, to jail, people like Julian Assange, right? And to essentially, they use their power to silence the people who dissent and who critique and who criticize, this administration. It's such a crazy thing to be happening. And to see them use that as some excuse to bloviate about democracy, it's distressing.
And there's really no better example of the overly and wrongly cozy relationship between legacy media and the government than this entire event, which is a cozy relationship between the media, government, and celebrities involved for no reason. It's really a kind of a sham, with the additional, switching topics just ever so slightly, with the additional layer this year of these are people who lectured you about doing anything fun or social for literally years now, and then they did it, and I'm sure, I don't know what's going to happen, but it would be perfectly in keeping with how these people have handled things so far to, within a few days, be calling for the remasking of children or of people entering, the supermarket or something, even after they did this. Perhaps because they did this, if cases rise for some reason, a hypocrisy that they're now just fully wallowing in.
Yeah.
What did you think?
Yeah, absolutely. It's disgusting. They have one standard for themselves and each other and another standard for us. The number one form of solidarity that is alive and well in America is ruling class solidarity. And that's what you saw at the White House Correspondents Dinner. It's what you're going to see at the Met Gala. You're going to see politicians there, hobnobbing, rubbing elbows with celebrities. I mean, that is, we're living in a time of where politics and celebrity culture become one and the same because everybody's rich, right? The journalists are rich, the politicians are rich, the celebs are rich, and so they have the same economic interests, and they're all liberals, right? They're rich liberals, and so they sit there and they stew in their own juices, and they call anybody who disagrees with them racist, or anybody who points out, their class privilege. It's really gross. And the masking thing, totally, Robbie. Of course, all the servants have to wear masks, and all of the elites get to walk around without them. It's so gross.
Well, I will say one of the high points I did think was Trevor Noah calling out the hypocrisy of the mask mandate.
Did mention it, yeah.
But he also did call out the fact that, everyone at the event had to take a PCR test or a COVID test immediately before coming. And that included not just liberals, but a lot of members of conservative media who were there as well, who might then return predictably to Fox News and pretend that they are not complying with those kinds of COVID mandates. So it does feel like there's a lot of hypocrisy across the board.
always enough to go around.
Well, CNN's Brian Stelter had a moment of self-reflection after the dinner. During his show, Reliable Sources, Stelter commented on Biden's speech and said, America's democracy is not a reality show, but is the media guilty of making it seem that way? Yeah. You think?
Listen, in my book, I talk a lot about the history of American journalism. And, it used to be, even when it was catering to a more working class audience and not exclusively focused on the rich the way it is today, it was very sensationalist in nature. Sensationalism is not in and of itself a bad thing when it's reflecting the people who need to have their lives exposed, who need to have the struggles that they're struggling with exposed, right? The problem right now is that it's sensationalist, but for the rich, right? The New York Times has become sensationalism for the ruling class. And I think that's where, we can feel that disconnect, right? Like how gross it is that people who consider themselves to be like above all of this stuff are actually the most emotionally invested in the news right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Batya, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And we will have more Rising right after this.